Well, I don't know about you, but every time I hear that there's a new season of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here coming, I say, who cares? And every time they announce the celebrities that are going to be on the show this time, I say, who? However, this time is a little bit different. Not only is I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here back in Australia, again, who really cares, but they do actually have a person in this season that I find very, very fascinating. I've chatted with him previously, not on the Aussie Wire yet, but hopefully that day will come, but I have interviewed him previously. He's Nigel Farage, and his inclusion in the show, and what's happened as a result of his inclusion, is actually rather interesting for those of us that are interested in soft power, cultural power, using entertainment to influence opinions. But someone who's been watching this far more closely than me, because despite Nigel being in the show, I still haven't watched actually a single episode, but someone who has and more is Ben Leo, and he joins me now. Ben, thank you so much for making time.
Hey man, thanks for having me.
Now, you're not just a fan and a watcher of the show. You've actually come to Australia. You've been supporting Nigel in some way. How does that work? Was that just a volunteer thing? You just decided you wanted to come over, or do you have a working relationship with him? And he's inside the camp. How can you help him when you're outside?
Yeah, so I'm much like you, where typically I wouldn't watch this series. It's not my cup of tea. I don't really care about reality TV, but Nigel has a show on UK TV network, GB News, the fairly new TV station in the UK.
Sure.
I work for GB News. I'm a reporter slash sometimes presenter and previously a producer on that channel. So GB News came to me and they said, Ben, this is big for us. Our star man is going to Australia. He's going to be in the jungle. It's going to be the biggest reality TV show in the UK this year. Do you want to go to Australia to report on every cough and spit of Nigel's progress and update all the viewers back home? I said, yeah, of course I will. It's winter in the UK. It's dark and grey and wet, and it's sunny out here. So why not?
So you've just become like like an ET reporter just for GB News this time. Now, it is fascinating. Now, GB News, of course, the Aussie Wire and GB News, we were the two networks that were in the atrium at the ARC launch that happened recently in London, and we thoroughly enjoyed the guys at GB News were great to us there, and we thoroughly enjoy your programming. But it is a fascinating thing that Nigel Farage was, invited in the first place by the producers. I mean, I kind of smell a rat. They're looking for a villain. They're looking for someone to target. And then it's interesting that given that, he accepted. What was the thinking there?
So Nigel says that he's been approached to do I'm a Celebrity for the past sort of 10 plus years.
Wow.
He said that apparently they call him every summer and say, Nigel, do you want to do it this year? And every time he says, no, 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 no. But I think the clincher this time, and he's made no secret of the fact, is that, partly they offered him a mega signing. It's a record series signing of £1.5 million. Typically the fees celebrities get on that show is anything from sort of 50K to $250,000 at the top end, but £1.5 million. To be frank, I just don't think he could turn it down. The second thing, which is more interesting, is Nigel has a desire to get back involved in politics in the UK,
right?
Or at least he's been hinting heavily that he does. And his theory of thinking was that if he can touch base or connect, I hate that phrase, it's a PR phrase, but if he can connect with up to 10 million viewers of I'm a Celebrity who are predominantly young people aged 18 to 35 who previously wouldn't have given him a chance in an electoral sense before, and maybe the only thing they know about him is the stuff that the mainstream media print about him, that he's a racist or he's anti-migrant or he's a xenophobe or whatever. He thought this might be his chance to give them a genuine side of him that they wouldn't have seen before. So I think there's a bit of forward planning going on there, sort of thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead. So for when he does get back into politics, potentially when the Tories get wiped out by Labour next year, and they are going to get wiped out, it's going to be a bloodbath. There's potentially going to be a spot as the potential for the leader of the Conservative Party in the UK, or there's a gap for Reform UK, which is the kind of sort of libertarian wing of the Tories to fill the gap.
Look, I can understand that logic, but he must be well aware. I mean, we're talking about a man who's been hated by the media for a very, very long time. He must have known, and surely did in advance, he was not going to get a free pass by the producers. He was not going to get any sort of favours by the editors. And of course, the media, who then take whatever's in the show and then report on it, we're not going to do him any favours either. I've seen a string of articles saying, the show has capitulated to Nigel Farage's xenophobia, talking about this particular clash that happened the other day. And here we have a reporter saying that there was a clash between Nigel Farage and Nella Rose. And notice the language, viewers all say the same thing as Nigel Farage and Nella Rose. clash as though they represent some sort of a monocultured groupthink. Do you really think that in such a hostile media culture that Nigel might actually benefit from being on the show?
I'm sure he was probably aware that he's at the mercy of the editors. And to be honest, we have seen that play out in real time. I think personally, I've been watching the show day in, day out. I've been speaking to people that work on the show, that are inside the camp, that have heard conversations that have been broadcast and not broadcast, by the way. We can move on to that. There's some conversations Nigel's had about, say, Donald Trump, which ITV, the network behind producing the show, deliberately haven't broadcast for whatever reason.
Yeah.
I think he probably knew he was at the mercy of the editors, but he's probably just thought, he's had decades and decades of being vilified by the mainstream media and the press. So if he's going to get paid £1.5 million for it, and there is a slight chance that he could do some good with it and take advantage of the situation, then why not? The comments about Donald Trump. So he's had a couple of rows in there about immigration, about Brexit. There's a French, we call them Remainers, people who voted Remain. Sure. They didn't want to leave the EU. He's a French guy who works in the UK. He's on a TV show. He said, Nigel, what you did with Brexit was disgraceful. It was disgusting. And Nigel said, well, why? What's the problem? And Fred was like, give me 3 benefits for Brexit. And Nigel gave him like that. And it kind of, Nigel came out looking the better for it. That's happened a couple of times about migrants, Brexit, and also this latest row with this Nella Rose person about cultural appropriation, whatever the hell that is. But Nigel each time has come out of that looking so good, and arguably he's won the debate and actually proven that you can have these discussions and these debates about what normal people think are taboo subjects. I mean, it's not that controversial to want to protect your borders and filter who comes in, but he's shown that you can have these discussions on a very basic level with normal people, what you'd call normies, without being toxic or tribal or being shown up to be racist. And I think that's a big win for him.
Well, see, you and I know that, and we've known that for a long time, and Nigel knows that, but it's still amazing to me that he's put himself at the mercy of the editors who could very well still have tried to twist what he said. So it's actually quite remarkable that you're saying that despite the editing and the producing and their choices to withhold certain conversations, in your view, he's still coming across very well to the public.
Yeah, so this is just a theory, and some strange people will call me a conspiracy theorist for believing this. But from what I've been watching the show day in, day out, as I've said, my theory is that at the start of the series, ITV probably wanted to paint him in a bad light by showing these rows about Brexit, migrants, and whatever else. It didn't work. And what we saw is, in the subsequent episodes, was a total airbrushing of him at all. He wasn't featured. One episode, there was, out of an hour, 15-minute episode, we had about 40 seconds of him on one occasion. Another episode, we didn't see him at all. So we went from a flurry of these arguments at the start about all these cultural issues where he came out looking good. And it seems that maybe the editors or the producers suddenly thought, oh, well, this isn't working because he's not a racist. He's not a nasty Nigel, as they call him. And suddenly they just pulled the plug on him completely, and we didn't see him for ages.
I wouldn't call that a conspiracy theory at all. I've worked long enough in and around the television world that reality TV needs a villain. That's what makes reality TV work, whether it's Real Housewives or I'm a Celebrity or whatever the show is. They need a villain. They thought they found it in Nigel. And maybe you're right. Maybe he's actually so successfully been communicating that he's actually turned the tables on them. Now, we actually had a bit of an interesting situation come up here where the person that we just saw him having a chat with, or primarily with, obviously there was a group of them sitting around, Nella Rose was then absent for the following challenge. Apparently there was a minor medical incident. She is back in the camp now. A lot of people have gone crazy with this. There's a lot of conspiracy theories, and I don't want to get too far down to the ET news stuff. That's not what we do here on the Aussie Wire. But is there anything to be read into this? Nigel ended up being the one who was on this challenge. Some people are saying that was a ploy by the producers to try and put Nigel under more pressure. Do you give any credibility to that theory, or do you think there's a more benign answer here?
No, not really. I don't think there's much in that. So that situation where Nella had to leave the camp for medical reasons, we weren't told, and I haven't discovered what the medical reason was, but she was just excluded from the trial before the voting even took place. Right. So it's not as if she was voted to do the trial and then suddenly they swapped her for Nigel. Right. It just happened to be that she was excluded from the vote. Nigel went to the public vote, and the public chose him to do the trial. If there is any sort of genuine quote unquote conspiracy theory, it's the one I just spoke of, where at the start he was suddenly getting loads of airtime and these rows about Brexit and stuff, and people calling him racist and inhumane, and then suddenly, because he showed that he's not those things, and he proved himself quite capably. They just don't show him at all. I mean, that's got more substance to it. But on the flip side of that, just for balance, the argument is that Nigel's just boring, and it's an entertainment show, and actually he's just a boring guy. And as far as the producers are concerned, he's not delivering the goods as people would expect.
Well, he's not playing the part of the villain that they cast him in. So now we get to my last and the big question. Do you think Nigel's got the chops? Do you think he can go all the way through to the end and actually win I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here?
So the way the show works is you vote for people to stay in the camp. You don't vote for them to leave. So I think he will get very, very close to the end. He's got millions and millions of fans, despite what the mainstream media tell you and the leftists. They say he's irrelevant and he's a nobody. But if he was irrelevant, he wouldn't have won a national election with the Brexit Party a couple of years back. He wouldn't have delivered almost single-handedly our exit from the European Union over the course of 20 years, culminating in that 2016 vote. He's not irrelevant. He's elected to the British Parliament, but he has had arguably the most influence outside of Westminster than any person in the history of this country before. So he's not irrelevant. He's got a lot of fans. He's got millions and millions of fans. And if just a small slither of those fans call and vote for him to stay in the camp, he's going to have a very good chance of winning this show. And do you know what that will do? That will send all the people at The Guardian, all those lefty papers like The Mirror, all the mainstream media networks who don't want him in there at all. They think it's some sort of like platforming Hitler or Stalin or some bizarre theory. It will send them into a meltdown, and I can't wait for that. I'm absolutely here for it, and I'm buzzing for it.
Well, you and me both, because from my perspective, now that we're in the situation we're in and he's in the show, really I can't lose, because either he wins and we watch the meltdown as you've described, or if he does actually get kicked off at some point, please, can you just slip a message to him somehow through a cameraman or something? He's got to make a pun about Farage exit on his way off the show. Like, that would just make it all worthwhile. Look, thank you.
But he did sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
He did a promo video which hasn't been played yet, so maybe I shouldn't tell you about it. But he did a promo video for when the voting starts. He says, "For the first time in my life, I'm asking you to vote Remain. Remain for me in the jungle." It's quite funny. So he does definitely play on that.
It's beautiful. I love it. Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time. Safe travels back to the UK. Thank you for coming on the Aussie Wire. And look, I've not paid attention to I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here before, but you've changed my mind. I'm actually going to start watching the rest of this season, at least for as long as Nigel's in there. Cheers.